Hey guys, Marty Macisso here with another quick video. I'm going to give you my outlook on 2022, actually in a broader economic kind of viewpoint. We're going to discuss what housing bubbles are. We're going to talk about rates potentially moving higher, what's a recession, and maybe impacts on war and inflation, and see if all that is going to affect the 2022 and the moving forward outlook on the overall economy. What's a housing bubble? I've had people ask me this recently. You're going to see it in the news. Bubbles it's an economic term, basically means overexuberance with any asset. Hits a critical tipping point, and basically a bubble means it bursts. So what does that mean? You can have kind of prices moving upwards so fast, something makes it tip, something happens, and then you have a massive reversal to the downside. We've seen it as recently as about 10, 12 years ago with during the financial crisis. There was certainly a housing bubble. Historically, we've seen bubbles in the stock market, oil markets, real estate. You've seen it in crypto markets recently, metals, tulips, actually going back, 100 or so years ago. Whenever you have overexuberance from a buyer standpoint, it usually ends or corrects when a bubble happens. Everybody thinks they can see a bubble forming, and when that happens, are we currently in a housing bubble? Who knows? I would just compare this to 2008 and say we're in a different economic structure in terms of the housing market. Over the past 10 to 12 years, we've had much better lender guidelines. In 2008 and the 10 years before that, we had no lender in mortgage guidelines. You had people who didn't have jobs, who had terrible credit, and really should never have gotten any kind of loan, get multiple mortgages, and you can see how that could end badly. There were adjustable rate mortgages, again, subprime mortgages, no income, no asset verification mortgages. So that hasn't really happened for the last 10 years. That is a good thing. Currently, the current consumer balance sheet, meaning, what are your assets, what are your liabilities? The consumer overall today, on average, in America is very strong as far as the amount of savings, really the amount of equity they have in their primary residences and in other properties. That's much different than 2008. There was no equity. You had a lot of very, very low down payment to no down payment to negative down payment programs being sold prior to 2008. Which led, obviously, to that 2008 real estate-led financial crisis. So we're in different situations. Real estate's actually really strong still, even in the face of potential recessionary signals. And another thing, currently new construction is still very slow relative to what it was back in 2008. And there are other factors in terms of how the current governments, local governments treat people who fall behind on their mortgages. It's just a different political environment. The rush to foreclosure does not exist like it did in 2008. So that obviously is a different, a factor comparing what potentially may be marketed as a housing bubble we're in compared to 2008. Clearly, the current housing market is facing unprecedented levels of appreciation. I don't think that's sustainable, 20% a year. I don't think that's healthy for the overall housing market. So I think even if we flatten out, that doesn't necessarily mean a housing bubble is formed and popped and is correcting. We'll get into that in a second. What's a recession? A recession is used very broadly in the media. What it really means is you're looking at economic growth in terms of GDP, gross domestic product. That's how the nation is judged on how its economy grows. Recession means it's just negative for a couple of quarters, and it doesn't necessarily reflect a terrible thing happening, all throughout the economy. There are broader, reasons and meanings behind what a recession is. Now, a recession can lead to job losses, employers pulling back, um, and and things like that. It's not a stock market crash and a real estate crash. Recessions are different. It's a different thing. Those can be things that occur during recessionary times. You can have corrections in markets. Markets are made to correct. It's a healthy thing. Markets don't always go up for 10 to 12 years consecutively. The Federal Reserve actually intentionally engineers recessions. They do that when inflation is just out of control, which we do currently find us in an inflationary environment. And inflation is out of control. So that's why you're seeing mortgage rates and interest rates of the Fed, going up and going up fast. What is stagflation? Stagflation is not a good word, and we hope that we avoid a stagflationary environment. Because what that means, most recessions are actually caused by slowing economies. When an economy slows, like I just said, employers stop hiring, maybe they lay off, wages begin because of that to stagnate or actually maybe go lower. That creates a deflationary force in the economy, which means prices tend to go lower. Sometimes you see housing going lower and rents going lower historically in the past. And stocks and equities tend to go lower when deflation happens. Mainly, prices tend to go lower because economic output is slowing. Stagflation is not a good thing because it's caused by higher prices, and that can actually be you can understand. You have an economy where prices are dropping. At least prices are dropping to the average consumer. That's a good thing. So when you have inflation leading to a recession, that can be a stagflation type of economy. Happened in the 70s, late 70s, when energy prices shot higher and there were embargoes with Iran, things like that in the Middle East. And we had very high interest rates as a result to get stagflation under control. So it's something the Fed is really trying to avoid. Remains to be seen if they'll be able to do that, because we obviously have high energy prices for a lot of reasons. And inflation, that's the X factor. So what is the outlook? Who's got the crystal ball? You tell me. It's going to depend on a lot of factors in play. It's the supply chains. Obviously, COVID in the United States and around the world the last couple of years destroyed supply chains for obvious reasons. No one was working, and no one was producing, but people were still buying, weirdly enough. So you had supply chains create upward pressure on prices. Currently, there's COVID lockdowns in China. That's something to look for. That could actually slow economic global growth. Is that a good thing, a bad thing? Might put pressure downward on prices as far as energy goes. A big X factor is the war in the Ukraine. We don't know. I mean, the Ukraine, if you don't know, and Russia, they're critical points for global production in wheat, energy, and precious metals. So, as soon as they can create a ceasefire or get rid of, what's happening over there, more clarity will happen when you look at the current inflationary forces out there. This will affect more Europe than the United States, but the globe is all interconnected nowadays. So the Fed is also, they're going to aggressively raise interest rates that they tell us. We'll see if they continue to stick to that. That's certainly going to affect economic production. However, employers are still struggling to find workers. The current jobs numbers came out. Jobs are still being created. Unemployment is really low. It's a 50-year low, unemployment. That's a good thing. People have jobs. The job seeker is currently in the driver's seat. that can also create upward pressure on prices. So we have a lot of things that are just creating inflationary environments everywhere. Um, Normally, it's a good thing if it's just wages. People are making more money. That usually leads to more prices because they're buying more. Their buying power is good. When you combine it with inflation, it's a mixed bag because your dollar gets less for you when you have an inflation. What's good though, again, like I said, the consumers are stronger nowadays. Most people who have the wealth in the country are the baby boomers, and they're entering the retirement phase. So that's a good thing because they will have a lot of that economic demand and buying power, even if we enter a recession in the future. You're still going to have demand, so that may balance that out. We have technology, obviously, that's always kind of moving forward. Problems usually create solutions, and it's a good thing. And I think this whole COVID and war all happening in the same time period, you're leading to a different overall geopolitical outlook. And we're moving from globalistic economies where supply chains are interconnected to more nationalistic, meaning we're going to bring energy production back to the United States. You're going to bring supply chains, microchip processors, and semiconductors back and onshore a lot of that stuff. I think companies are just looking at it and saying we need to lower our risk because we can see how quickly global supply chains can disappear overnight. And that's a good thing, and it may take some time to show up in the consumers' pockets and actually lead to lower energy and gas and oil prices, which the average consumer, those are huge things, that is an economic driver. And, you know, obviously food prices and things like that, if we continue to see escalation in those, that's only going to create economic headwinds that can lead to recession, people pulling back, and not buying, the excessive consumer goods that a lot of the markets, especially the stock market, banks on. So as far as housing goes, we're still in a very, very low inventory environment, especially in Maine. I can only say Maine. Now that remote working is such a big thing, I don't see the Maine real estate values significantly dropping. I'd forecast they'll level off, but sales are also dropping because a lot of buyers are now kind of pulling out with increasing interest rates, and just the fact that there aren't a lot of properties. There's still a lot of buyers though. So I do anticipate still upward pressure on real estate prices. However, with economic headwinds, those will level off. And quite frankly, we need that, to create more of a healthy real estate market balance. To have a healthy market, and I know this is a long presentation here, but I'll end it like this. For a healthy market, you need both buyers and sellers. And right now, we have a lot of buyers, not a lot of sellers. So, we'll continue to look at the data and the numbers as they come out. Any questions about real estate or anything else, please give me a shout. Thanks.